Claire studied the case and thought about the meaning of human life. Behind every line she read was someone's fate, shattered hopes, and universal despair. The girl mentally asked once again why people do not appreciate what they have. Why does love pass so quickly and families fall apart? There was no unambiguous answer to these difficult questions. It was this fact that upset the young lawyer most of all. Claire opened another folder with details of the collapse of yet another family. She had time to run her eyes over only the first paragraph when the door of her small office swung open noisily. Mike stood on the threshold. Claire jumped up. "Mike, I haven't had time to go through all the materials yet." The chief wrinkled his nose. "Claire, why do you always jump up when I see you? This isn't an army, thank God. I don't mind discipline, but not to this extent." Claire knew from personal experience that it was better not to argue with her superiors. She slowly lowered herself into the chair. Mike was pleased with his subordinate's obedience. "That's better, Claire. You're jumping up and down like a schoolgirl. This isn't your first day on the job. You should be used to the conditions in this company by now." And they are, they're pretty relaxed, which makes for a productive work environment. At least I am personally convinced of it. The chief's smile gave the girl more confidence. Claire also smiled. "Yes, it's a very comfortable environment, and I'm used to it. It's just that I have an involuntary tendency to jump up and down. It's a reflex. At university we were taught that the rules of subordination are mandatory in any structure, and during practice we were constantly fined." Mike lowered his formidable body into a vacant chair. "Don't tell me about the chain of command. It was invented by the bureaucrats. They need something to justify their paychecks, so they make up all kinds of rules. No, of course, I'm in favor of discipline, but everything must be in moderation." Quite a long monologue bored the chief, and he exhaled noisily. A moment later, Mike moved the street closer to the miniature fan on the employee's desk. "It's still hot today. I can't breathe." "Good job, Claire. That's a good one." The boss nodded at the fan. "I'd like one of those, too." The girl had no choice but to promise her boss. "It's as simple as that. Tomorrow you'll have one, too. These fans can be ordered online. Convenient and inexpensive." Mike jokingly wagged his finger. "I'll take your word for it. Don't be fooled." "Okay, Claire, let's talk business. You've been distracting me the whole time. First your chair hopping, now this cute fan." From the expression on the chief's face, the girl guessed that the miniature device made a strong impression on him. But she did not comment on it again, for fear of disorienting the chief again. Mike enjoyed the fresh air for a moment before he said seriously, "Claire, I have a personal favor to ask of you." Noticing how surprised the girl's eyebrows rose, Mike hurried to reassure her. "Just do not think anything bad. I'm no longer at the age to chase young girls, although I used to be really good at it." "A pleasant memory," cheered up the chief. But Claire waited patiently for him to get to the point. Suddenly, Mike stood up. "If you have a spare moment, come and see me," Claire asked Mike in surprise. "What about matters of special importance?" Mike sank back into his chair and sighed. "The point is that my friend is in the process of getting a divorce. That is, the situation is not easy, and therefore the woman needs the support of a good lawyer. The topic is very sensitive because she is quite a well-known person in business circles and for this reason does not want to loud publicity features of the divorce process. And her husband, in short, this young and very zealous bastard, wants to weaken the woman who, sorry Claire, from this shit molded a man. His nakedness is boundless. Not only did he ruin a wonderful woman's life, but he wants to take a piece of her property. He flooded the poor woman with lawsuits and hired a whole team of lawyers with her money. But she and I have decided on a different tactic, and you're the perfect person to lead the charge." Claire burst out. "Mike, but I've only just—" The chief gave his subordinate a thoughtful look. "I know you're just learning, and you haven't had a tough case yet. But you haven't lost a trial yet. And that's a very important indicator in our work. In fact, I'm sure you can handle this case." The chief walked out, closing the door carefully. In the soul of the young lawyer fought a variety of feelings. On the one hand, she was proud that Mike trusted her, but on the other there were fears that she would not be able to justify that trust. The girl's excitement was so strong that she, following the chief's example, pulled her heated face to the silently running fan. Claire had been working in a private law agency for less than 3 years, but during this relatively short period she had seen a lot of things. On the very first day of her arrival at the company, the chief did not ask the standard questions. He took a glimpse of the girl and decisively stated that you would be in charge of divorce cases. Of course, Claire was shocked by such frivolous treatment, but she realized that it was not her place to restore order in someone else's convent. The girl performed a deep nod, signaling that the command of the chief was accepted. She expected to hear additional explanations, but Mike stared at her with a dissatisfied look. "If you understand everything, then what are we doing?" Claire stepped uncertainly from foot to foot. "I don't know yet." Mike tossed the sharpened pencil away from him so that the writing object spears into the pile of papers. This symbolic moment made a very powerful impression on the law school graduate, as did Mike's shout. "If you don't already know about it, go study the burning cases. There's no time to waste when you've got a lot of work to do. We're busy here, so there's no time for pleasantries. The company's reputation is on the line. You understand, baby?" Claire nodded again. "I do." This was not what she had expected. She was completely confused by the behavior of the man under whose authority she was to work. Desperately, she wanted to cry and run away from this office. But Mike realized from the expressive facial expressions of the girl that he had overreacted a little. Already more peacefully, he said, "Here, but no tears here. This place is not for the faint of heart, you will soon realize. Therefore, it is better to get used to the peculiarities of work from the very first day of work. And I advise you to pay less attention to my mood." Mike winked at the new girl. "Sometimes I can be worse than any fairy tale villain, but at heart, I remain kind." Very soon Claire realized that Mike was really the kindest person. He treated his subordinates fatherly, for which he was loved and very respected in the team. Having coped with excitement, the girl went to the chief to clarify the details of the delicate assignment. But at that moment, the cell phone gave a voice. Seeing a familiar number on the screen, Claire forgot about everything in the world. With tenderness in her voice, she whispered to Ethan that she had forgotten all about you. Without waiting for the words, reproach of the groom, the girl began to talk to the phone. "Sonny, just do not swear. I repent. I forgot that we agreed to meet, but I will definitely correct myself. Do you believe me?" There was a cheerful laugh, and then a voice that made the girl's heart beat faster. "Claire, do you know how to talk teeth and distract attention?" The girl laughed back. "That's the second time I've heard that in the last half hour." A note of jealousy slipped into Ethan's voice. "I wonder who beat me to it." "The chief. But I don't think you'd be jealous of him. That's one way of putting it. I've got a temper even tougher than Shakespeare's Othello. Ethan, for me, you're the only one. You're beyond competition. You're my prince on a white horse." And the groom's laughter soothed the girl's ears. And at the end of a short communication session, Ethan said, "Of course, I am pleased to hear such words, but I would still like to see you. I have something urgent to do with you. I am waiting for you in the park at our place. And remember, you only have 5 minutes to get ready. Try not to disappoint me this time." Claire guessed that Ethan was alluding to a recent incident that had occurred while meeting his parents. Ethan's parents greeted their future daughter-in-law with cheers. "Claire, we are so happy that our son has finally decided to say goodbye to the bachelor life." Ethan's mother added, "You are so pretty, a worthy companion for our Ethan." Claire was a little embarrassed by the overt flattery, but she didn't show it. She had no idea what lay ahead of her. When everyone was seated at the richly set table, the questioning began. In their irreversible curiosity, Ethan's parents went so far as to ask the girl for details such as her father's earnings. Most of all, they were interested in the property question. And when Claire told them the tragic story of her mother's death, they did not even express basic sympathy. Only John, Ethan's father, asked, "I guess your mother left you a solid inheritance?" This question angered the girl, and she rudely enough replied, "Is money the most important thing for you?" The tone of the future daughter-in-law did not like the owner. He also said with an obvious challenge, switching to you, "It's good for you to talk about the meaning of life, when behind the back of an all-powerful daddy. Our son doesn't have such a reliable rear end. We're simple country laborers. We value every penny, every ruble we earn, and your daddy's money just floats in." Claire couldn't help herself. My daddy works day and night at the operating table to get a decent paycheck. But his main goal isn't money, it's saving lives. By the way, he grew up in the country too, and then he went to school. Who prevented you from doing the same? Ethan realized that the argument had gone too far, but did not know how to defuse the situation. Louise helped to establish peace at the table. The hostess shouted at the disputants, "Why are you wasting water?" Claire's right. Not everything in this world is about money. There are more important things. The meal went on, but Claire was left with a bad feeling. She'd refused to spend the night at the house, citing a work emergency. Ethan wouldn't let her go. "Where the hell are you going to spend the night? And don't take it out on my dad. He's an old school man, so he's used to thinking like that." The girl threw in her heart, "I'm not offended by your father. What surprises me is that you haven't even said a word in my defense." Ethan laughed. "Claire, you're the lawyer, and I'm not the one to compete with you." After this heart-wrenching confession, the girl was a little relieved, but she didn't change her mind, getting behind the wheel of the car, given by her father for her successful graduation from the university. Claire drove off into the city. She'd expected Ethan to volunteer to escort her, but he didn't. He sluggishly said goodbye to her and headed toward home. She felt a little bitter on her soul. But the girl tried to console herself. Ethan has not seen his parents for a long time, so it is understandable that he wants to be with them longer. And in general, he is not obliged to satisfy my every whim. In fact, it was my fault that the conversation didn't work out. I could have kept my mouth shut out of respect for his father. After the first visit had failed, she'd visited Ethan's parents several more times, but they no longer pestered her with questions, and on the contrary, tried to emphasize that they were happy that their son had decided to tie his fate to such a wonderful girl. Claire had no shortage of admirers. Even in early childhood, she was surrounded by male attention. In kindergarten, the boys were happy to fulfill the little wishes of an ordinary girl. A little later, when Claire was in first grade, two young cavaliers even fought over her. But the teacher wasn't scolding them, she was scolding the girl. "Claire, I think you're the one who started the fight. If you've already decided to be friends with someone, choose one, instead of flirting with both." The girl disagreed with the teacher. She made a sly face and, not without insolence, said, "And if I want to be friends with all the boys at once? What then?" The teacher could not answer the first grader's question. She was embarrassed and moved the conversation to another topic, but later expressed her opinion to the girl's father. "Tim, don't take this the wrong way, but your daughter is misbehaving with boys." The man was so surprised that he couldn't contain his exclamation. "What do you mean, wrong? How am I supposed to understand you?" The teacher realized that he had said something ridiculous and tried to get out of the awkward situation. "I'm sorry. I didn't put it well. The thing is, your daughter is a leader, and all the boys are drawn to her." Tim expressed surprise again. "I don't see anything wrong with that." The teacher was completely confused. "Indeed, there is nothing wrong with your girl having leadership qualities, but she also has a bright appearance. That's why our boys are eager to win her favor." Tim laughed. "What do you mean?" "Anne, but it's a natural process. Think back to your childhood. Personally, I tried to woo all the girls when I was still in kindergarten. So, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that kind of relationship." But the teacher didn't give up. "Here I completely agree with you. Friendship is useful in all forms, but you can't be friends with everyone at the same time." Claire first promised Ben she'd be friends with him. Then she made the same promise to Peter. The boys got into a fight. "And you think my daughter is responsible for this?" Anne exclaimed cheerfully. "Of course, your Claire provoked the boys with her fists. First she turned one boy's head, then the other. Please, will she influence her daughter?" Tim grinned. "In what way can I influence her? Forbid her from socializing with her classmates. Do you think such a method is right?" Since no understanding was found with the ward's father. Anne resented Claire, but she took it out on the little girl. It came to the point that once, in a fit of uncontrollable anger, teacher in front of the whole class humiliated Claire. "Claire, upstarts like you are no good. You'll grow up to be an upstart." The first graders didn't understand the true meaning of the expression, but they all giggled as they pointed their fingers at Claire. The one who tried the hardest was Pither, who had rejected her. Claire ran out of the classroom and hid under the stairs so that no one would see her crying. When Tim arrived at school to pick up his little daughter, Anne wondered, "Isn't Claire home? If she was home, I wouldn't have come to get her." "Where is my daughter?" The outraged parent demanded an answer. The teacher didn't know what to say. Stammering, she began to explain confusingly. "You see, Tim, your girl can be unruly at times. We had an incident today, too." Claire threw a tantrum during class and then ran out of the classroom. I thought she'd gone home. Tim was furious. He whispered angrily, "Anne, pray to God that nothing happens to my child." An elderly cleaning lady helped find the missing child. As teachers and high school students began searching the building and the surrounding area, the woman asked, "Why are you all rushing around? Or did the emergency services start checking again? Did one of the teachers think to ask the janitor?" "Aunt Wendy, did you see that first-grade girl Svetlichnaya with pigtails?" The cleaning lady had a serious look on her face. "Every other girl here has pigtails. There's one hiding under the stairs." Tim rushed to where the cleaning lady was pointing and found his daughter sleeping on the dust bags. A frightened Anne spoke in a confused voice. "Well, it's not a big deal. The missing person has been found." "You should have panicked," Tim whispered threateningly. "We'll get to the bottom of this. I promise I will not abandon this outrageous case. Where do you see first-grade girls skipping class?" Anne was shaking like a leaf, but she didn't want to admit her guilt. "How can you keep track of them all? I'm alone, and I have 24 of them." Tim was ruthless to the teacher. When he gave his verdict, "I think you've made a bad choice of profession. It's dangerous to trust you with children." Tim didn't scold his daughter for her rash act, but tried to find out what prompted her to run away from the lesson. Claire confessed right away. "Anne said that when I grew up, I would become a hand-me-down. Everyone started laughing at me, and I took offense. Especially Peter. It's a good thing I didn't become friends with him." Tim was shocked to hear it from the mouth of his 7-year-old daughter. The next morning, he went straight to the headmaster and demanded that he deal with the teacher who was making such remarks in front of the children. The head of the school listened to the indignant father and sighed heavily. "Dear Tim, I understand you perfectly well, but there is nothing I can do. Chronic shortage of staff, especially the weak spot of primary classes. No one wants to work with kids." Tim is staring at the principal. "So you won't take any action?" The principal waved his hands. "I'm sorry. The only thing I can do in this situation is to give Anne a stern warning. If I take more drastic measures against her, she'll wave goodbye. That is, she'll go to another school where she'll be welcomed with open arms." Tim didn't expect this. He asked confusedly, "What am I supposed to do? Should I accept the lawlessness in your school?" The principal tried to smile, but why so unflattering about our institution? We do our best. We devote all our efforts to the education of future citizens. But if you personally are not satisfied with our school, you can transfer your daughter to a good gymnasium. You are a wealthy man, after all. You work in one of the best clinics in the country. Tim immediately rejected the principal's suggestion. "My daughter will study in an ordinary school among ordinary children, and this is a matter of principle." The head of the educational institution spread his hands. "Well, then I can offer only this way of solving the problem, to transfer the girl to a parallel class." Tim agreed, and his conversation with the school principal Claire learned a little later, when she and her father went to visit her grandparents. When Claire heard about the teacher's outrageous behavior, she started to wail, "What is going on? This is a real outrage. In our time, the teacher was a role model, a model of decency. And now what? Tim was right to tell you the headmaster should be transferred to another school." Claire saw her father hugging her grandmother affectionately, and then said, "Mom, I told the principal and I'll tell you again, I'm not going to raise my daughter in a greenhouse. I want her to be prepared for all of life's difficulties." Grandmother said with judgment, "So you want to throw her, like that puppy from the proverb, immediately into the water? If she doesn't swim, let her drown." Father grumbled grudgingly, "Mom, you chose a bad comparison." A few seconds later he added, "You know very well that Claire is the most precious thing I have." It was that phrase, or rather the tone in which it was spoken, that turned the little girl's soul upside down. She vowed that she would never upset her father again. Even that day, Claire had decided that she would never associate with boys at all. However, the last promise was soon forgotten But the girl became more careful about choosing friends. After Ethan's call, Claire didn't hesitate long and went straight to the chief. Seeing her, Mike pointed to the table, which stood next to the desk. "Have a seat. It's going to be a long conversation." Claire crossed her arms over her chest and begged, "Mike, can I come back this afternoon? I have to go out for a while. It's an emergency." The chief raised one eyebrow and suddenly smiled. "Did the groom miss you?" The girl blushed. "No, he didn't miss me. He just wants to ask me a favor. But about what? I do not know yet. He has a strict schedule at work, so time is very short." The chief's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Oh, I wish I was your age, your worries. Okay, run on a date, but then come straight to me. We'll discuss the intricacies of the case and determine defense tactics." Of course, the 5 minutes Ethan had allotted her had long since expired, so Claire ran to the park where her fiancé was waiting for her. This way of traveling was hampered by high heels, and several times she risked falling. Ethan spotted her from afar and waved hello. He sat on a park bench watching his bride with a smile. When Claire sank down beside him exhaustedly, Ethan laughed. "After the wedding, I'll have to take care of your physical training." The girl had not yet had time to catch her breath after running, so she didn't answer right away. "Are you kidding me?" The young man drew the girl to him and gently poked her in the forehead. "What are you? Do I look like an evil torturer? It was just very amusing to watch you run. And if I'd crashed, that would have been funny too." Claire sounded offended, and Ethan made a funny grimace. Claire shouldn't be offended by little things like that. "Maybe I was making a bad joke. I'm sorry, you rascal. I won't do it again." The young man made a funny face at her. Ethan knew very well what was annoying. What makes his future wife happy? After all, they had been dating for almost 2 years, which is a long time by today's standards. Despite the gaps in his education, Ethan had managed to finish construction college. He was an excellent physiognomist. By a person's facial expressions and gestures, Ethan was able to determine the mood of a person. This ability helped him a lot in working with clients. If he noticed that a person was dissatisfied with something, he used his natural charm. Colleagues at work envied the guy. "Ethan, you're definitely lucky. Your clients are going numb to you. Share the secret. How do you influence them?" Ethan would have loved to share his experience, but he himself could not really explain why he has no misfires in working with clients. However, the young man had no misfires with the fairer sex. Every girl or woman he tried to surround every girl or woman with attention and care, and it worked without fail. But Ethan quickly tired of the next novel, and without regret parted with girlfriends. Parents scolded their son for frivolity. His father was especially hard on him. "Ethan, so you miss your whole life. I don't understand why you're so obsessed. Still looking for a princess?" Such reproaches caused the young man to laugh. "What if I get lucky? And indeed some princess will fall in love with me. You're living your dreams. You're a country boy, and you're looking for a girl to marry. It's a pity it didn't work out with Helene. She would have made a good wife." Mentioning her former lover made me both sad and annoyed. Ethan did his best to forget about her. His efforts were not in vain. The further time went by, the more he forgot the past. Meeting Claire proved that dreaming was not harmful, although their acquaintance happened under rather strange circumstances. Ethan immediately realized that this girl was sent to him with the very fate. The most surprising thing is that this event coincided with his move to the city. Then, almost 2 years ago, Ethan was just beginning to learn an unfamiliar profession as a courier. After serving in the army, he returned to his native village, full of hope. But for several months he could not find a decent job. His parents patiently tolerated his chronic dependency, trying to help him with advice. For example, his father persistently offered to employ his son in the farm where he himself worked as chief agronomist. But the head of the family began with reproaches. "Ethan, stop fooling around. How long do you intend to cool off?" The son was annoyed by his parents' nagging. "Dad, but you can see that I'm looking for a job." Dad was starting to lose his temper too. "Where are you looking?" "At home, lying on the couch." "Dad, why start an empty conversation on this topic if you yourself know perfectly well what attention with work?" "Ethan, I wanted to quickly finish an unpleasant conversation, but my father did not give up." You're not looking hard enough? We have a shortage of people, and you would be happy to take in the workshops. Or you could go to a construction site. Did you study for nothing? Do you want me to get you a job at the fuel depot? My mother immediately joined the conversation, offering her own employment options. We also need responsible people without bad habits at the grain dryers. Salaries are good, and the work is not hard, because everything is mechanized. This was usually the point where the parents would get into an argument, which allowed Ethan to sneak out of the house. He did not support any of the opposing sides because once he realized that he did not want to spend his life in the village. This true realization did not come at once. Before the army and the first time after the service, he did not consider the village life so inferior. Ethan even planned to settle down in his native land and have a bunch of kids. He had fallen in love with a girl at school, who for a long time he considered a standard of beauty. Helene reciprocated his love. She wrote him tender letters when he was in the army. Ethan got used to the idea that he should marry her. But a tragedy happened to Ellen, which ruined all the plans of the guy. The accident occurred just during the period of job search. It was this circumstance that made Ethan reconsider his intentions. Without informing his parents, he simply ran away from home, taking some money from the family piggy bank. His mother gasped when he called 2 days later to say he was okay. Ethan, my father, and I almost went crazy, did not know what to think. Is that any way to treat a parent? Was it so hard to warn us? The son began to ineptly justify himself. Mom, I'll return the money as soon as I get my first paycheck. I'll send it to you by transfer or bring it myself. The mother impatiently interrupted her son. What does money have to do with it? Although you did a bad thing. But there are things more important than money. This crowning phrase of the mother finally knocked the guy out of his rut. And when he heard his mother sobbing in the phone, Ethan physically felt how her tears echoed in his heart. He began to plead with his parent, Mom, please don't cry. Believe me, I didn't mean to hurt you. It was just spontaneous, as if someone from above told me to go to the city, that it was my destiny. That confession put my mom at ease. Maybe it was true. Maybe really in the city you'll find a good job and, God willing, you'll meet a nice girl. Or maybe I sensed my mother had something else to say. And he wasn't wrong. With a heavy sigh, she said, I didn't want to tell you, but Ellen's gone too. Her father took her away. They're very upset with us. Maybe it's for the best that he took Ellen away. You're right, Mom. It's better for everyone. I may be condemned and called a coward, but I'm not ready for such a serious trial. The mother didn't answer, but from her restlessness and breathing, the son realized that she fully supported him. Ethan was fabulously lucky with his job. Almost without leaving the station, he found a suitable position for himself in a small pizzeria. The young man went into the institution just to have a snack, but right at the entrance stumbled with a glance at the announcement of the girl who served him. He asked for the sake of interest, And how long have you had a vacancy for a courier? The girl grinned. A long time. Since this morning, though, a few people have already come in. But the owner didn't like them. Tim asked with a chuckle. Maybe your master likes me. The girl fixed her gaze on him. It is quite possible the master is a bore, but pays well. If you do not sin in weakness to drink and honestly treat the duties, then you should try. Without waiting for Ethan's answer, the girl called the owner. Steve, there's another candidate here who's interested. Before Ethan could blink his eyes, a short, fat man in a Bavarian cap appeared. His appearance caused the guy to be startled because this man, who resembled a Kolobok, seemed to have transformed out of thin air. The owner looked at Ethan for a long time, then began to study his documents with the same partiality. Finally, he said, "Well, servant, let's see what you can do. If you pass the probationary period, I'll keep you. I can't promise much, but you won't be offended." Despite its modest size, the pizzeria was popular among the townspeople. It was especially crowded during the lunch hour, but among pizza lovers there were those who ordered late at night and even at night. Ethan traveled around the city in the owner's car, placing orders, forgetting to eat. Often he had to overwork, but he never once expressed dissatisfaction about it. The owner really paid well, and the guy was soon able to rent a decent apartment in a house not far from the place of work. One summer evening, Steve asked him to stay a little longer. "Ethan, we have a real mess today, you could say, a disaster. Anthony suddenly fell ill, and orders are full. Help me out, soldier." The boss called him Soldier Boy from day one, but Ethan was not offended by such an unusual nickname. Despite the wild fatigue, the guy cheerfully declared, "Steve, I am at your disposal to command." The owner immediately gave him a list of orders and asked Ethan, "Just try to meet the time, because there are people on this list which I do not want to upset." The young man was not surprised by such a request, but asked, "So you tell me at once, who to serve first?" The owner chose one from the pile of ordered coupons, the first to go to this address. "The doctor is our regular customer and my savior. A few years ago I was in a car accident, all broken. I thought I wouldn't be able to walk. Probably it would have happened that way if I had not been lucky enough to get to him. He's a doctor from God, a real talent, even though he's very young. He is about your age." Ethan was impressed by his host's story, and he was eager to see the wizard doctor. But when he arrived at the address and rang the doorbell, a girl suddenly ran out of the apartment, and then a guy in a fancy outfit. Ethan guessed that he was an accidental witness to a love drama. This hunch was confirmed by the words of the guy who threw after the girl. "Claire, wait. You've got it all wrong. I'm ready to wait for your consent even for eternity." The girl shouted back, "Arthur, please don't make such sacrifices. Why don't you want to realize that I just don't love you?" The couple for a minute or two clarified relations on the landing below the floor, and Ethan patiently waited for the denouement. Finally, the entryway door slammed loudly, and soon the fashionista returned. From his upset face, Ethan realized that this evening the guy was clearly unlucky. But the courier's job did not include such a service as consoling customers. And he said the duty phrase, "Pizza company, glad you do not change your taste preferences." The guy stared blankly at Ethan, and then sluggishly said, "Ah yes, I've already forgotten that I ordered pizza, although now it is not necessary." Ethan realized that this rejected dude was the doctor. He was afraid that the upset customer would suddenly refuse the order, so he hastily handed him 2 boxes. The landlord immediately took out his purse and paid. The next moment the apartment door slammed shut, so Ethan did not have time to say the final phrase to the customer, because he had neither time nor desire to think about the doctor's problems. Ethan quickly made his way down to the first floor. He jumped out of the entrance and went to the car, but suddenly stopped like a stumbling block, because the girl who made the good doctor suffer was standing near the car. Noticing the confusion of the courier, the stranger asked if you could give me a ride to the city center, because I have no wheels today. Naturally, Ethan could not refuse the girl at such a late hour, but he warned her I was taking you all the way home, but on the way I had to stop at 2 addresses. The girl smiled. "I'm in no hurry. I'm even interested in learning the intricacies of courier work." Her soft voice, especially her smile, made a strong impression on Ethan. He had never experienced such feelings when meeting girls before. At first he was even a little confused, but the girl was the first to make conversation. She gave her name and said that she worked in a lawyer's agency, then began to ask the guy about his work. Claire behaved casually, as if they had already known each other for 100 years. Ethan, too, quickly forgot about the first moments of awkwardness. He told jokes, funny stories from the life of a courier. It was that night that changed everything in Ethan's life. The next morning he realized that Claire was sent to him by fate. Terribly worried, he called the girl and set her a date. She didn't refuse him. Pleasant memories flashed through Ethan's mind for a brief moment as he watched Claire. But all extraneous things receded away when the girl settled down next to him. Claire looked guiltily at her fiancé. "I'm sorry I'm late. The chief gave me a new case, so I had to stay a little longer." The young man asked in an indifferent tone. "And what, did it hurt?" The girl began to apologize again. "Ethan, I have no right to divulge confidential information." The young man with resentment in his voice said, "Oh yes, I completely forgot that we are birds of a different flight. I'm just a pizza delivery boy, and you are an important person." A nervous convulsion ran down the girl's face. "Ethan, why are you doing this? You know very well that for me it's the person, not his status or wealth that matters." The guy took his eyes aside. "I'm sorry. That something lately became irritable. It's probably because of my father's illness." Claire asked anxiously, wondering if it was something serious. Ethan waved his hand dismissively. "It couldn't be more serious. I don't know much about medicine, but it's something in his spine. He can't help but stiffen up. He can't help but stiffen up." My mother is in a total panic because Bada is the mainstay of the house. I can't quit my job to help them. That's the situation. Why didn't you tell me before? Or have you forgotten that your future father-in-law is a doctor? No, I didn't forget. But I don't feel comfortable making an offer. Tim doesn't like me very much as it is. I don't want to annoy him by asking. The girl looked affectionately at the groom. Ethan, please do not fill your head with ridiculous speculations. My father is a very decent man and an excellent doctor. It would not cost him anything to arrange for your father to have a consultation. You just need to make an appointment in advance and choose a convenient time for the visit. Ethan became animated. Do you think it would be worth asking him? Claire laughed. I'll talk to my dad tonight and call you tomorrow. The young man cheered up. Claire, this is a real miracle. I'm so glad I met you that night. I can't imagine what would have happened if you'd stayed with that young doctor. In a burst of the best feelings, Ethan hugged the girl, but she hurried to get out of his embrace. You can't be so ruthless, Ethan. Arthur is very good. He's been courting me for a long time, but you can't command your heart. Ethan asked defiantly, pitying that loser? Then know that I do not like it. The girl did not answer his question, but the tone of her voice changed when she noticed. Ethan, in Arthur's place could have been you. Let's not talk about it anymore. I do not like such conversations. The girl stood up abruptly. I have to go to the chief. I'll call you tomorrow. Ethan also got up and together with his fiancée headed for the exit from the park. He wanted to kiss the girl goodbye, but she came back. There are a lot of strangers here, and I don't like to advertise my feelings. He grudgingly threw, We are almost husband and wife. Why be shy? And you're acting very strangely. Claire was surprised. What's so strange about my behavior? Ethan grinned. At least the fact that you have a wedding coming up, and you're thinking about completely extraneous things. Normal brides choose the dress and hairstyle, but you? The girl interrupted the groom at half a word. Ethan, I'm not like everyone else. It's a pity that you still haven't realized it. Claire hurriedly tapped her heels, leaving her fiancé alone with his thoughts. Ethan gave her a long look, and only when she was out of sight did he think, my princess isn't as simple as she seems, or maybe she's just playing nice on purpose to wind me up. Was I mistaken? For the first time in almost 2 years, Ethan doubted the right choice of a life partner. He strenuously chased away these thoughts, reassuring himself that marriage to Claire would not make him happy, but would allow him to live a comfortable life without much effort. Of course, Claire had no idea what her future husband was thinking at those moments. When she learned of her fiancé's father's illness, she began to think hard about how to help Ethan's father. These thoughts did not leave her when she was in Mike's office listening to the chief's instructions. Mike took his time. He was carefully telling his subordinate what to consider when defending his acquaintance. Claire, I'm asking you to take this case seriously. I suggest you meet with your client as soon as possible. You already have experience in identifying pitfalls, so it is desirable to dig up some solid dirt on her husband. Claire listened attentively to her boss and nodded her head like a Chinese bobblehead, agreeing with her boss. But at some point she involuntarily imagined herself in the place of the unfortunate woman whose interests she was to protect. It was so realistic that the girl burst out, No, my Ethan is not like that. Mike looked at his young colleague in surprise. Who's Ethan? Claire, are you all right? The girl squeezed out a smile. I'm sorry, it slipped out. It was just a fantasy. Mike grinned. It's a familiar situation. When I was young, I too, so to speak, entered into the image. Every time I imagined myself in the client's shoes. Don't worry, it's a normal reaction, and you shouldn't be afraid of it. If you understand everything, then go ahead. Do you need a car? No, I'll take my car. Claire walked out of Mike's office, thinking about the fact that the chief always jumped from you to you when talking to her. Although it didn't embarrass her, she still wanted to know why. Already in the car, she dialed the number of her client and asked her for a meeting. Ellie answered without hesitation. Can you come over now? I'm not too busy today. This woman's story shocked the young lawyer. Ellie successfully coped with the problems of business, but in her personal life was not able to understand in time. She had taken a young Alphonse to her bosom, and under the influence of his charm made a number of unforgivable mistakes. She admitted to Claire, You're a woman, and you must understand. I was so blinded by love that I did not notice or did not want to notice the obvious. And now the hour of reckoning has come. Ellie, sobbing. You see, everything has been so hard for me. The business took my beloved husband away from me. I didn't risk becoming a mother for the business. When Tom came into my life, it was like I was born again. I believed that all was not lost, and that I too had the right to happiness. It turned out it was all a mirage, and my husband was only pretending to be in love for the money. You won't believe this, but he tried to poison me. Thank goodness the housekeeper spotted him putting powder in my tea. Claire picked up on that thread immediately. Ellie, did you contact law enforcement? The victim responded immediately. Of course I did, and she immediately gave the poisoned tea to them for testing. After this egregious incident, I decided to file for divorce. But Tom beat me to it. He concocted some dubious dirt on me. His IT buddy helped him do it. In short, he accused me of adultery and slander, and demanded compensation for moral damages. Of course, I can calm this insolent man down. But you understand that I don't want publicity in my case. Claire calmed the woman. Nothing. I will try to dig up on your Tom that he will immediately forget about his claims. She said goodbye to her client. Claire wanted to go back to her office to run Tom's Alfonso through the database. But looking at her watch, she realized that today it was useless to start the investigation. Moreover, she still had to talk to her father. Opening the apartment door, Claire sniffed her nose. Wow, my dad's cooking something delicious. Tim came from the kitchen. You guessed it, daughter. My big sister gave me a recipe for a very simple and hearty meal this morning, so I thought I'd experiment a little at the stove. Claire kicked off her cramped shoes and slipped her feet into the soft slippers. She walked into the kitchen and snuggled up to her father. Daddy, you don't know how much I love you. Tim glanced at his daughter. I love you too. But you don't look so good today. And come on, hands on the table. 2 more minutes, and then we can, as the barmaid says, sample. In Claire's little family, they had this rule of not a word of business during the meal. Tim himself strictly enforced this statute. When dinner was finished, he declared with a smile, All my daughter, it's your turn now. I cooked dinner and you wash the dishes. Claire was childishly embarrassed. You know how to spoil the mood, knowing full well that I can't stand washing dishes. Tim was surprised. What a number. Yesterday I was alive and the next morning I was dead. You're getting married. Do you really expect that your courier will do the dishes, laundry, and cleaning for you? A blush broke out on the girl's cheeks. Dad, I get the impression that you're not happy that I'm getting married. Of course, I can guess that you don't like Ethan, but… Tim hastily interrupted her daughter. The main thing is that you like him. But that's not the point at all. I hate to tell you these things, but I'm more experienced in life. Maybe I'm wrong. Your Ethan reminds me of an Alfonso, Claire exclaimed. Daddy, Tim said very calmly. I'm sorry to be so frank, daughter, but I said what I think. I'll be glad if I'm wrong. The daughter furrowed her eyebrows. Now you've ruined everything. Now I don't know if I should ask you. The smile lit up the man's face again. Daughter, ask me for anything you want. Claire told him briefly about Ethan's father's illness. As she spoke, Tim's expression changed from amused to worried. Why didn't they catch it sooner? Tell your Ethan to bring his father to the clinic. I'll have Arthur take a look at him. Claire was surprised, but the doctor had a different specialty. Tim grinned. Wow, another medical expert. For your information, Arthur is a very specialized doctor and you'd be hard-pressed to find one. Anyway, we'll see what's going on first, and then we'll decide on the treatment of our future relative. In the meantime, let our patient lubricate his back with this wonderful ointment. Tim opened the cabinet where the medicine cabinet was located. Just a moment, my daughter, just a moment. It's here somewhere. This ointment is great for back stiffness and soreness. After a short search, Tim took out a package of ointment and handed it to his daughter. The drug is quite expensive, but I give without regret. Let tomorrow Ethan to get his father the drug, and preferably that he did not delay with the consultation. The girl anxiously looked into the eyes of her father. Dad, then I think it is convenient. What exactly? Asking Arthur? Tim patted his daughter on the shoulder. Daughter, a doctor in any situation must be true to his oath and do his duty. Arthur is a pro to the core. For him, the main thing is the life of the patient, and everything else is of secondary importance. After talking to his daughter, Tim could not sleep for a long time. He lay there thinking about the intricacies of his fate. How many times had it thrown him serious trials? Could it be that this quest was not over, and he would be tested again? Unfortunately, he himself did not know the answer to this question. The man turned over on his side, hoping that the change of position would help him sleep, but restless thoughts were spinning in his head in a merry-go-round that could not be stopped. Suddenly, a thought slipped into his mind that made him wary. Tim, fate constantly gives you clues that you miss. Tim began to go over the details of his recent conversations with his daughter and suddenly realized what it was that was keeping him in suspense. He whispered silently to Alphonse, and Claire's fiancé reminded him of that character from the distant past. Realizing that this night would be a sleepless one, Tim no longer tried to put himself to sleep. He began to recall the most notable events of his life. Tim had identified his vocation back in elementary school. He could not pass by an abandoned cat or dog and tried to treat injured animals. To the parents of the boy, this hobby of the son seemed strange, so his mother constantly scolded him. Tim, what are you looking for in the house? All of them? Did not they tell you at school that animals transmit all sorts of diseases? The boy was outraged by such an accusation. According to you, Mom, if they're sick, they should be thrown out, but then they'll die. And that's inhumane. The mother grumbled, did not dare to throw out the animals, which the son determined to stay in the house temporarily. The father never scolded his offspring, he supported his acts of mercy. Tim, you don't listen to your mom. Do what your heart tells you to do. Animals can't fend for themselves, so you have to help them. God willing, you'll grow up. You're studying to be a veterinarian. Tim himself at first wanted to devote himself to this noble profession, but then he realized that he had to save people. The realization of his destiny came to him when he was in 7th grade, because in some subjects his knowledge was clearly lame. The village boy's diligence was not in vain, and he finished school with only 2 4s in his certificate. Parents Tim resolutely declared Tim will go to Moscow. I want to be like the famous Dr. Elizarov. Mother laughed in response to such a loud statement. Son, wake up. Where are you to this Elizarov? He must be from a rich family, could afford to study in the capital. And who are you? A simple country boy in a veterinary school. You can't go wrong. As always, the father stood up for his son. Mother, don't say what you don't know. This Elizarov is from a poor family and also, by the way, was born in the village. Who knows, maybe our Tim will become a celebrity. Don't let him get in the way. Father's word in their family was decisive, so mother never brought up the subject again. Tim got into university on his first try. All his years as a student he thought only about his studies and did not get distracted by entertainment. His classmates teased him. Tim, don't overdo it on the granite of science, or you'll be left without teeth and girls won't love you. Tim did not take offense at such taunts and usually replied, all in due time. When I get my diploma, I will go out for a month, catch up on missed opportunities. But one circumstance prevented the fulfillment of a bold plan. In the last year, Tim was offered to move to the Department of Military Surgery. He thought overnight, and in the morning agreed. For several years, Tim performed his medical duty in different hotspots. In one of these places, he met Mary, a young nurse at a military hospital. Their romance developed according to the classic scenario, and the couple was in no hurry to join their fates by the bonds of marriage. But one day there was an incident that made the lovers rush to formalize their relationship at the medical facility, where they saved the lives not only of the military, but also of civilians. One night a gang attacked. Only by a miracle everything was without casualties. When help arrived and the bandits were neutralized, Mary couldn't recover for a long time. She was crying, and with a tremor in her voice she said, "It's Tim. I can't go on. I really want to live. I want a normal family and children. It's good that my contract is about to expire." Tim also had similar feelings, but he had no moral right to show his weakness in front of his favorite girl. The only thing the military doctor dared to do was to propose to Mary. He barely got a week's vacation from his superiors. Tim went to the mainland with his bride. They were married at the district registry office, but the modest ceremony did not diminish the feeling of happiness felt by the newlyweds. Tim promised his young wife Mary, I promise that every day of our life together will be as happy as today." Most likely, Tim would have kept his promise if not for another intervention of Providence. The couple decided to delay having children until after Tim's service. When Mary returned home, she easily found a job and also looked for a vacant position for her husband. She told him the good news by phone. "Tim, I wish you wouldn't delay. You have no idea what I had to do to convince the chief to hold off on the surgeon's job. And he only said yes because you have field experience." After 2 years apart, the couple finally settled down to a settled life. Of course, the main issue that they had to decide about having children was number 1 on the list of urgent matters. And one evening Mary whispered in her husband's ear, "We're going to have a little one soon, Tim. I went to the doctor today. Our baby is now 5 weeks old." Tim was numb at first, then clutched his wife in a hug. From that day on, Tim began to carefully monitor his spouse's health. He protected her from exertion and controlled the daily regimen of the future mom. The pregnancy proceeded without abnormalities, and the couple already knew that they would have a girl. That summer day, Tim remembered every minute of it. He and Mary planned to go shopping to choose comfortable clothes for the future mom. But, as luck would have it, Tim was urgently called to the ward. He didn't want to disappoint his wife, so he suggested, "Mary, why don't you wait for me? I'll try to be quicker." The woman laughed. "That's the one. 'Cause I don't know what fast is in surgery. It's good if you're back by morning." The man was confused. "What are we supposed to do?" The woman pressed against her husband with her whole body, and at that moment the baby stirred in her womb. Mary laughed out loud. "Our daughter has a say, too." Tim knelt down and cradled her belly. "But I can't hear what she's saying." "But I can. Our daughter told me to tell you to go to your job. We're going shopping. I'll take my friend as my partner. She needs to shop too." Tim knew his wife's friend well, abandoned by her husband with a small child in his arms. The poor woman was desperately torn between her daughter and her job. Almost every night Mary talked about the plight of her friend, and it began to bore Claire. One day he asked Mary, "Don't you and I have anything else to talk about? I understand perfectly well, and I sympathize with her. But you and I have our own worries. Besides, your friend probably has relatives. Let them help the poor thing." Mary was angry with him then and threw him a short, "She has no one. She grew up in a dysfunctional family and does not want to deal with relatives. And she's got a husband like that, as it happens. And he has the nerve to demand money from his wife's friend. Like she owed him money." Tim was ashamed of his statement, and he no longer made such remarks. His friend often came to visit him with her daughter. Tim got used to the presence of this couple in their apartment. Especially the little girl behaved calmly, not causing trouble to the adults. On that last trip, too, I took the baby with me. For ease of movement and to save time, the women called a cab. Tim helped them to get settled in the car, and he went to the department, where he was already waiting for a patient in the operating room. As his wife predicted, it was a complicated case, and he operated on the patient for almost 6 hours. When tired but satisfied, Tim left the operating room and went to his department. He noticed that his colleagues looked at him strangely. He asked the nurse on duty with a drooping voice, "Can you explain what these looks and sighs mean? What's wrong?" The nurse made a guttural sound and burst into tears. "Tim, your wife? Is she in there?" Tim rushed back into the operating room, but his coworkers wouldn't let him in. "Tim, it's best if you don't see her yet." He vaguely remembers what happened next. Everything around him became talking shadows, but he didn't understand what the shadows were telling him. Tim was screaming, demanding to be let in to see his wife. He thought Mary was calling him. One of the young surgeons led him to the freight elevator, where 2 bodies lay on a gurney under sheets in a small hallway. At that moment, the realization came to him of what had happened. The young resident explained in a sad voice. They were both in the back seat. When the minivan hit the cab, there was something wrong with the brakes. Tim asked in a deadpan voice, "What about the cab driver?" Order Tor answered, "Concussion and several fractures. There was a kid in the car, a girl. She was thrown forward from the impact, caught between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. That's what saved the little girl." "Where is she?" The young doctor was surprised by the question, but answered, "The girls took her to our residence room for now. The special reception center should come for her." Tim took a quick step towards the service room where the nurse on duty was giving compote to the orphan little girl. Tim squatted down next to her and held out her hand to the girl. "But that Claire left you and me alone? What are we going to do?" The little girl held out her hand to him. Tim held her to his chest and whispered, "Don't be afraid, baby. Now we are destined to be together." Dawn was beginning to break outside the window. Tim jumped out of bed briskly. "I'll sleep it off later." He headed for the kitchen, and on the way he looked into his daughter's room. Claire was sound asleep. She had a blissful smile on her face. Tim whispered, "You should be happy. Happy for everyone. For Mary, for Mom, and for our unborn daughter. I'll make sure nothing gets in the way of your happiness." Claire opened her eyes for a moment. "Dad, is it time to get up already?" He quietly replied, "Sleep a little longer. I'll make breakfast." Tim didn't tell his daughter the whole truth, believing that the time for confession was not yet ripe. While making breakfast, the man thought that Claire should find out everything before her wedding. The morning began with a little trouble. Claire, as promised, had called Ethan. She thought he'd be pleased to hear that Tim was going to be personally involved in his father's treatment. But instead of gratitude, she heard a grudging acknowledgement. "Claire, this is a bad time. I can't. Today I have a lot of work to do, and tomorrow I'll have a full day's work too." The girl was surprised. "Ethan, is it so hard to ask for leave? After all, it's about your father's health." For about half a minute only Ethan's noisy breathing came from the phone, and only after a long pause he said, "I understand everything, but I cannot even for my father to risk work. If my boss throws me out, where else will I find such a warm place?" The girl was at a loss. Suddenly Ethan exclaimed, "Claire, could you go to mine after work? I would be very grateful if you would teach me." She had other plans for the evening, but she could not refuse the man who was soon to become her husband. Without enthusiasm, the girl said, "Okay, Ethan, I'll see your parents off and give you the ointment." Ethan was glad for the quick resolution of the problem. "You can give your father a ride to the city on the way back. What's the point of wasting time? Let him move in with you. I don't think Tim would mind." Claire was used to agreeing with her father about everything that concerned their household, so she answered uncertainly, "Yes, of course he won't mind." The working day flew by like a blink of an eye. Claire managed to dig up some ironclad dirt on her ex-husband, and she was satisfied with the result of her labors. So that her father wouldn't worry, she called him. "Dad, I'm going to be late visiting Ethan's parents tonight. Can't he do it himself?" Claire could tell from her father's voice that he wasn't happy. She didn't like the fact that Ethan had left her to take care of his parents. All the way to the village, she thought about what she had done. At one point, a traitorous thought crossed her mind. "Claire, aren't you rushing into marriage? And don't you think your relationship is strange?" She carefully banished the thought, but it came back again. She thought to herself, "I can't wait to fulfill my mission and go home." It was already dark when the familiar outline of the village where Ethan's parents lived appeared in the distance. But the road to the village was so broken that Claire had to drive at a minimum speed. The complete absence of streetlights made it difficult to move. The girl began to look for the right house by memory, but it was difficult to navigate in the pitch darkness. She got out of the car and went down the street to the house where the windows were burning. Soon the girl heard voices that sounded familiar. "Oh, I'm already there." Claire added a step. She walked into the yard and froze like a stumbling block, because she realized that she was in the wrong house. She wanted to turn around, but voices were heard again from the open window. She guessed that she accidentally ended up in the yard of the neighbors and Ethan's parents. The spouses were talking loudly, but the strangest thing was that they were discussing Ethan's family. It was the familiar last name that made Claire, breathless, listen to the conversation. Aunt Linda was mostly talking, and Uncle Jack only occasionally made brief remarks. Apparently, the conversation had not been started long ago, so Claire caught the gist of it. Aunt Linda informed her husband, "You can't believe people after that. We live and don't know that there are such bastards around us. Don't wrinkle your forehead, Jack. You know what I say about them? They pretend to be decent. The other day she was bragging to the broads that her son's got the town fool, whose father's a big shot and has a lot of money." I heard Uncle Jack's judgmental voice. "Why do you go around the village gathering gossip?" The wife objected. What gossip if I heard with my own ears boasting of my son's exploits? I'd rather tell her how her Ethan gave Ellen a baby and then abandoned her. Uncle Jack agreed, but he was wrong. But it was such love. The girl had waited for him from the army, and he'd left her in her hour of need. Claire felt short of breath. A terrible thought burned her mind. Ethan wasn't who he said he was. But she didn't want to believe what she'd heard? No. Ethan couldn't have done that. There must have been another reason for the breakup. But the second I immediately snickered, then why didn't he tell you about the fact that he had a girlfriend? Emotions were so strong that the girl instinctively took a step to the side and stumbled. A sharp pain pierced her ankle and she screamed. From the window heard Igor. "Look, who is walking under our windows?" The owner jumped out of the house with a shout, "Who here teaches on one leg?" Claire stepped out of the shadows of the trees. "Uncle Jack, don't be frightened. I got a little lost." The man took a closer look at the uninvited guests. "Linda is the neighbor's daughter-in-law. She just happened to wander into our yard." The hosts welcomed our guest, and Aunt Linda told her in detail about what Ethan had done to his girlfriend. Ellen worked at the post office, and to keep up with her bicycle, she rode around the villages. Sometimes until late at night delivered correspondence, and the roads here are God's worst, and ravines, quarries, and other obstacles. One day, Ellen was unlucky. She fell off a cliff on a shortcut, broke both her legs, her spine, injuries. Her father thought the girl wouldn't make it, but she did. She was still a cripple, though. Claire couldn't wait to find out what part Ethan had played in the story. Aunt Linda was reluctant to tell her. I don't want to badmouth the man. But then, right after Ellen was all fractured, Ethan went to town. Our hillbillies judged him. And then we found out that Ellen was in the position she was in when the accident happened. Her mouth was dry with excitement, and Claire asked the hostess for water. Aunt Linda handed her a full mug. "Didn't Ethan tell you anything about Ellen?" The girl shook her head. "No. It was the first time I heard the story from you, and it was good to hear it. Tell me, where is Ellen now?" Uncle Jack spoke up this time. "They're around here, in the next village. She has a big house. Sometimes he comes here to check on the house." Claire thanked her hosts and headed for the exit. Aunt Linda was running after her and would spend the night. The girl grinned bitterly. "Thank you for the invitation, but I have to go." She took out a packet of ointment from her purse. "Aunt Linda, please tell Ethan's father. He's been having back problems, and this ointment is very effective." The woman looked at the package. "Wow. Foreign ointment. Okay, I'll give it to him in the morning. Why don't you make your future relatives happy?" Claire waved his hand uncertainly. "I don't feel like it, and it's late." She wanted more than anything to cry, clinging to her father's safe shoulder. But Claire realized that she could not tell and give in to her emotions. After all, an unbalanced state is dangerous for those who drive. Gathering her will, she concentrated on the road. It was well past midnight when she opened the apartment door. Claire had no sooner flicked on the light switch than she heard her father's voice. "You're finally here. After your call today, I've had anxiety in my heart all day." Claire rushed to her father and burst into tears. "Daddy, I almost did the stupidest thing in the world." Tim let his daughter cry, and when she calmed down, he asked, "What are you going to do now?" The girl confidently said, "I know only one thing for sure. There will be no wedding. It's better to be alone all your life than to marry a man who will betray you at any moment." Claire calmly informed Ethan of her decision in the morning. The guy obviously didn't expect such a sudden reversal. He began to shout that all this is a lie, that the evil neighbors slandered his good name and that he has no daughter. And Ellen had fathered a child with a lover unknown to him. It was unpleasant to listen to all this. Claire hung up and disconnected her cell phone. That same day she went to the registry office and picked up the application. But for some reason it felt so light, as if her soul had been cleared of unnecessary junk. Ethan took the breakup badly. He pestered Claire with constant phone calls. At first he begged her to come to her senses, and then began to threaten. His parents also joined in the process of saving their son's floating happiness. Every minute Claire glanced at the door behind which Arthur had disappeared half an hour ago. She knew that behind that austere door real magic was being performed, for her husband was a real wizard, because he gave people back the ability to move and walk. A timid voice sounded nearby. "Aunt Claire, my mom is really coming." There was fear in little Tiffany's eyes. Claire hugged the girl. "Mommy will come. Only you and I have to wait for her." The little girl sighed heavily. "I could wait a whole day, or even a whole year." "Aunt Claire, tell Mommy the other leg will be sent." "Who told you such nonsense? Your mom's not a doll, so she can replace an arm or a leg. They're gonna put a special machine on her. She'll walk with it for a few months, and when it's removed, she won't need crutches." Tiffany was very impressed with this explanation. "It's like a fairy tale. When I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor like Uncle Arthur and Grandpa Tim. I'm going to fix children's legs when they break them." The girl began to speculate aloud about her distant future, and her thin voice rang frighteningly loud in the spacious hallway. At last, the door, which Claire had been watching, opened, and the doctor appeared on the threshold. With a happy smile, he reported, "All is well, girls. We can register our first success." Tiffany ran up to the doctor. "Uncle Arthur, can I see my mom?" The doctor stroked the little girl's smooth, enumerated head with undisguised tenderness. "Let Mommy sleep for a little while, and then you'll come and visit her. In the meantime, you and Aunt Claire can take a walk in the public garden. The fresh air will do you both good." Claire agreed with her husband. "I think you're right, and we should freshen up a bit." She held out her hand to her husband, and with his help she stood up. "God, I'm getting clumsy like a turtle." The man laughed. "If you are, I must tell you that you are a very adorable turtle." Arthur looked at his wife's stomach and said very quietly, "And there's an equally adorable turtle." Claire pointed at Tiffany. "Arthur, you don't think you're talking in front of the baby?" "Not the least bit embarrassed," the little girl declared. "You think I don't know anything? I don't know that little babies first grow in the tummy so that they are not stolen, and then they are born." The adults laughed with relief, and the doctor said, "Smart little girl came up with an interesting version. Let me walk you to the exit, or else you will lose your way in the labyrinthine corridors of our clinic." Claire was enjoying the spring sunshine. Tiffany was having fun on the small playground on the grounds of the clinic. She had already made some friends and was telling them all about it. Claire looked at the little girl, and she couldn't believe that she was the same girl she had seen 2 years ago in an old house on the edge of an unfamiliar village. After her breakup with Ethan, she had immediately set out to find Ellen, whose existence she had learned of from a neighbor. Although the said village was a few kilometers away, Claire lost half a day to search for the locality. But the wildest thing was that almost no one lived there. Several streets, houses boarded up with windows, and presented a very dismal sight. It is clear that there were no stores and other signs of civilization there. The only bright spot among this utopian picture was a little girl. For a few minutes, Claire watched the little girl in silence, hesitating to approach her. But an elderly woman came out of a nearby house and asked in a menacing voice, "What do you want?" Claire whispered, "I want Ellen." Their landlady once again cast her an unkind look. "Is it from the Social Security office? They're finally moving." I wanted to complain. Soon it turned out that Helene, the mistress's niece, was practically in a helpless state because after her injuries she was limited in movement. But disability is not given to the young mother, so the aunt has to pull everything on herself. She and Claire started complaining right away. "I wish I was younger, but I'm already in my 7th decade. I'm not as strong as I used to be." Claire asked about Ellen's father, and the woman burst into tears. "So he died last month, just me. Now what if something happens to me? My Ellen will be completely lost." Of course, after what she had seen, Claire couldn't turn around and leave. She went to the house where she met Ellen. Ethan's ex-fiancée didn't greet the guest too welcomingly. "What are you doing here?" "To enjoy my helplessness." "Enjoy it." The young woman jumped up from her chair, forgetting her crutches, and almost fell. Claire was just in time to pick her up. "Ellen, I've come to see you for another reason. I want to help you and your daughter." Ellen wouldn't stop. "You, Ethan, have been sent. He wants to make amends. How much is he willing to give me?" Claire asked Ellen to calm down. "No one sent me. Ethan and I parted ways." The young women talked for a long time and then cried together. Claire stayed the night and left early in the morning. She told her father the sad story of the woman Ethan had left. Tim said firmly, "We should show it to Arthur. I'm sure Arthur will help her." And that's how Ellen's fate changed in one day. She had undergone several difficult operations, but the belief that she would be able to walk on her own again gave her strength. Claire felt there was still something she had to do for her friend. Despite her delicate position, she was still practicing law, and her plan was to get Ethan to pay Tiffany alimony through the courts. All the evidence was already in hand. All that remained was to wait for the trial. Claire flinched when she heard behind her. "Where are you? Lawyer?" The woman turned around and saw the hateful look in Ethan's eyes. But she wasn't confused. "Yes, I'm here." "Why are you here?" The man struck a defiant pose. "I came to tell you that you're not going to succeed. You won't be able to pin someone else's freak on me. I understand that this is your way of getting back at me, but I will never acknowledge this child. I will deny everything." Claire got up from the bench. "Ethan, it's already been proven. Ellen had a daughter with you. And I also want to tell you that I thank God that I figured you out in time." Claire turned her back to her ex-fiancé and called out loudly, "Tiffany, we have to go. Mom must be awake by now." The girl looked at Ethan with interest. "Aunt Claire, who was that uncle you were talking to?" Claire replied in an indifferent voice, "It's just a passerby. Let's go quickly." For the first time, Ethan felt what they call remorse. He looked at Claire and the girl running beside her. He was in real pain. The pain overwhelmed him, but he didn't know how to get rid of it yet.